Hey guys, it's Kevin, my review for the second season of The End of the Fucking World. And right off the bat, guys, I'll just let you know, it is very difficult to talk about this season without delving into some spoilers. So right off the bat, I gotta give a spoiler warning, because if you actually get into this season, I mean, I just don't know how I can talk about it without it. So, spoilers right here. As you guys know, at the end of season 1, we left things off and James was shot. A lot of people thought that he was dead. He is, in fact, not. We see that him and Alyssa have gone their own separate ways. They've gone through their own separate paths. But when this threat starts to emerge, towards both of them, they have to find their way back to each other, but also have to learn whether or not they actually do need each other, or if they're able to survive on their own, and that's really all I'm gonna say. So, The End of the Fucking World Season 2. This is a very interesting season of television, because it's one that I really did not know if it was going to happen, similar to other TV seasons we got last year, like Big Little Lies Season 2 and things like that, which I'm going to go back to that season actually in a second, and you'll see why. But, you know, considering the way that season 1 left off, there was always a possibility. I mean, there is with any limited series, unless everyone dies to the point where it's just an impossibility to come back. There was always that possibility that maybe they could come back, maybe it could happen, and then I heard that it was greenlit, and I didn't really know how to feel about it. I didn't know if I liked the idea that they were continuing, because I liked the ambiguous note that we ended things off on in season 1. However, the trailer came out, which hinted at something much different than what we got for sure. It was very misleading in that way. But I finally got around to watching season 2. I know it's been like a month and a half since it came out, but I finally decided to watch it, and oh my god, this season was fantastic. And it's actually very similar to how I feel about Big Little Lies Season 2. That's why I made that comparison, because in the same sense that I think Big Little Lies Season 2 is not quite as good as the first one, it's almost as good. It's almost as good as the first one. There's just a couple things that do bring it down overall, but for the most part, this is a very satisfying, much different season of television than you are expecting from this show, but one that I really did have a great time with overall. But we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And look, getting into the performances here, I mean, season 1, the two leads really anchored the show. I mean, I've said it before and I'll say it again, I really don't think the show would be as good without Alex Lawther and Jessica Barden, but especially when it comes to this season, because they, I think, are even better here. They realize these roles even more. You can tell that they've really settled into them, and Alex Lawther especially, I mean, James is almost a completely different character this season, but not in the sense where it feels like they flanderized him. Like, no, he's gone through a huge transformation, and Lawther just really understands this character. He understands the pain that James has been through, but the fact that he's been able to open up to someone and how much more fulfilling this has made him, but that he also is going through a lot this season, and I thought that he still did an excellent job here. I still really love what he brought to the table. I think he was even better than he was in season 1. I really love what he ended up doing there. And then Jessica Barden as well. Again, she is just as fun. She's just as, like, you know, she's just not as nihilistic. She's just as sarcastic. She's still every bit as great as Alyssa. And the chemistry between these two is a lot different this season, because they don't share as much screen time together. They do share screen time together, but not as much as you would think they do. But for what they have, they do an excellent job, and definitely they are still the main thing that anchors this show. And I think your liking of the season is entirely dependent on how much you care about these two. And if you cared about them in season 1, which I'm sure most of you do, because why else would you be watching this, you will still fall in love with them in season 2. There's still a lot more to explore from these characters. There's still a lot to love about them, and they absolutely are the thing that still anchor the show. However, a really great newcomer is Naomi Ackie as Bonnie, who, you know, we saw her in Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker. Left sort of an impression there, but this is where we really get to see her range fully utilized because she just fits right in. This is a kind of character that could have been really annoying if not handled well, but Ackie really understands the very sort of dark and moody tone of the show, and she handles it perfectly. I really love what she ended up doing here. I can't get into her character too much because it does involve massive spoilers, but I really loved what she ended up doing here, and I thought that she was just such a great addition to this show, and again, just really fit right in with our two main characters here. And as far as the rest cast goes, everyone does a really great job. Josh Dillon is a really great new addition as this other guy that is in Alyssa's life, and I thought he was really charming and just a lot of fun. He added a lot to the show for sure. Christine Bottomley's in this season a lot more than she was in season 1, and we get to see a lot more of Alyssa's mother, the expectation she has of her, but also how hypocritical she is with the kind of person that she was, and I thought she did a really excellent job. I really loved Alexandria Riley as well. I thought she was another really great standout. She plays Gwen's sister, and I really liked her here. Everyone really does do a great job in the show. Nobody felt like they weren't into this season, and that's definitely one of the best things about it for sure. But now let's get to the directing and the writing, because when it comes to a season like this where they are continuing what was supposed to be a miniseries, you always have to wonder, is this something that the directors had a vision for, or is this something that they were, you know, sort of like forced into doing because the first season was so successful? And I think from watching this season, it's pretty obvious that Charlie Covell definitely had more ideas. And she does a brilliant job with directing this season because it is actually a little bit darker. They really do lean a lot heavier into the dramatic side of things. Yes, it's still very funny. There's a lot of hilarious moments this season for sure. Just things that Alyssa says, especially, always cracks me up. There's so many great lines from her this season. There's so much great, like, dramatic irony this season that the show did a great job with in season 1 and things like that. You know, they still know how to find the funny in dark situations, but the show is a little bit more mature now. It's a little bit darker, and because of that, Covell's style is that much more well realized. You can tell that she really understood where she wanted to take this show, what she wanted to do moving forward. She definitely did have a plan, and I thought she did a really great job here directing-wise. I was very impressed with what she ended up doing, and I definitely was a lot better than I was expecting. Like I said, when you have a show like this that is coming back, it can be hard to know what to follow up with, but I think she did a really great job. It doesn't really seem like to me like she struggled with, you know, where to go. No, it seemed like she knew exactly where she needed to go. Like, she had this in mind from the beginning, and it very much does feel the way. I don't know if it is that way, but it very much seemed that way, and I was very impressed by her directing here. It was still really great and still has that great, dark sort of feeling, but still also has a lot of heart to it. And that's the thing that this season is definitely not lost. It still has that great amount of heart, but it also has that great amount of, I think, satire and that great amount of angst to it that the first season had. And I really did appreciate that here. But getting into the writing here, the writing, I think, is not quite as good as Season 1. That is where we get to my main flaws, that I don't think the season is as well written as Season 1, but there are a lot of things here that I really do love. The biggest difference with this season is that for a good majority of it, Alyssa and James are very much split apart. They do have a section where they are together quite a bit. There's about 3 or 4 episodes this season where they are together. They are doing their own thing. They are on their own little mission. But there is a lot more time spent with these two apart. And I thought that was a really smart choice because while we got to see these two working together, we get to see a lot more of them on their own, how they're feeling in this situation. You know, what are they really wanting to do on their own? What are their own goals and things like that? And I thought that was a really good choice. And for James especially, you really get a lot of great growth with this character. He's been through a lot, understandably, with him being shot and things like that, but it really has given him this new lease on life. He is no longer just this emotionless guy who doesn't really feel like he has much of a purpose to live anymore. No, he really has grown into someone that does show his emotions now. He does open up to people. He's a lot closer with certain people in his life. Things affect him a lot more than they do. And it's just a really great it's a really great progression to see. It's a really great development for him, and I thought they did a really excellent job with that here. But he also is very sincere about his feelings for Alyssa. It's not just some girl that he's with because he can't be with anyone else. No, he generally is starting to fall for her, and that's a big part of this season, is starting to see these two develop genuine feelings for each other, and not just this companionship because they are similar, not just have this codependency because they've ran away and they've made this choice and now they can't go back. Like, no, now they are on their own. And so I think they did a really good job with showing the progression of this character, how he has gone from someone that was initially a sociopath to someone who is far more sympathetic to people and someone who is just far more understanding. And you really do get to see that. He still does have some creepy tendencies. He hasn't lost that completely, but he's just a much better person now than he was in season 1. You really do get to see how Alyssa did change him for the better, and I think they did an excellent job with that here. And there is a personal tragedy that he is going through that I'm not going to get into. While I did spoil that James is alive in this season, it's kind of hard to not spoil that. It's kind of hard to talk about the season without going into that. But the one thing I'm not going to spoil is what actually happens to him. But let's just say he's suffering a very personal tragedy, and the way that he handles it is much different than the way that season 1 James would have handled it. And the show really does that very well here. It really understands the differences between those two versions of this character, and I really did love that here. And for Alyssa, she is far more focused on learning herself, but at the same time, she doesn't really know who she is, really know what she's supposed to do after she's lost James, or at least she thinks she's lost James at this point. So she's a lot more on her own. She ends up with this guy that she clearly doesn't like all that much, but is just with him to get some kind of direction, and that stuff I think they handle very well, and I thought that definitely was a really good path for her. My problem is her stuff just feels a little bit rushed this season. I feel like the James stuff they handled really well, and Alyssa they do handle well too, and there still are some great scenes with her. There's a great scene especially with her and this guy that she's with, and you can just tell how she's really just with him out of convenience. She's not with him because she actually cares about him in this way, and you really do feel bad for this guy, but you also do see where Alyssa's coming from, where she's very much in this situation where she just doesn't know what else to do at this point. She's, become this waitress. She's now with her mom a lot more. There's just a lot of things that Alyssa doesn't really know where to go at this point. She's very directionless in that way, and I thought the show did a really good job with handling that stuff for sure. And I think they also do a really good job with showing, like I said, how much better these two are when they're together. They really do bring out the best in each other. And while Alyssa is initially sort of alienated by James and him returning and things like that, these two really do start to form a much closer bond this season, because now nothing is forceful. Now it actually does feel like there's natural progression in that storyline. That's a big part of this season, is seeing these two moving away from them just running away to being a lot more practical, because they weren't thinking things through. They weren't doing things in the way that they weren't doing things in a way that wasn't reckless. There was no sort of thinking whatsoever. And this season, they're far more rational human beings, and you really do get to see them become that here. And even though it's only been a season, these two have grown a lot, and I think the show did a really great job with doing that for sure. And this season, I think, is far more of a character drama for these two, showing who they've become and how they really do have to learn to find themselves before they can then be with each other. And I think the show handles that perfectly, and I love the way that was handled here. And so those two characters are rock solid enough. Like I said, this season, the heart of the show is still their relationship, and they do a really good job with that. But with the incorporation of the Bonnie character, we get this newer side to the show that we really haven't seen, because the show recognized there are things that Alyssa and James have done that aren't great, that are morally wrong. Sure, they had reasons for doing it, but we get to see how it's actually affected other people. Without spoiling anything, something that James and Alyssa did in season 1, Bonnie was heavily connected to, and she is very much serving as our antagonist of the season. And I've heard a lot of people say that this season lacks a drive. It lacks a, narrative sense of momentum. And I would completely disagree, because pretty much from the get-go, we get to see, how Bonnie's been affected. We get to see why this is so important to her and why she is now going after James and Alyssa for what they've done. And I think they actually did an even better job than they did in season 1, because season 1, it took a while for those cops to enter the story. If you guys remember, I wasn't a fan of them at first. Bonnie, though, I liked her right away. I think they did a really good job of getting us introduced to this character. So in that sense, that's something this season I think actually did even better, because there's always a sense of momentum. You know what Bonnie's agenda is from the beginning, and you're just, eventually when those stories intersect, you're just waiting for her to crack. You're waiting for her to finally turn on them, and there's always a sense of momentum there in that way, and I think they did a really good job with that here for sure. However, like I said, the one thing that does bring this season down just a little bit more from the first is kind of similar to Big Little Lies season 2, is that there is so much going on this season that some of it just doesn't feel as well fleshed out. Now, not in the sense where there's like, a bunch of storylines happening and it's all convoluted. No, it's not like that. What I mean is that there's a lot that James and Alyssa have been through within the past year. And with James, I think they do a really good job with fleshing out everything that he's gone through, how much he's progressed as a character, but how he is still very much struggling, and how he felt like he could have been a hero, but he ended up living, and what this has really done to him in that sense. There's a really good arc there of someone that wanted to have this heroic ending, but now failed, and now they have to continue, and how does that really work out for him? And I think that's a really good arc. As for Alyssa, though, while I do think that her storyline is very well done, and we get some really great moments with her, I do feel there's some stuff that is just a little bit rushed there, particularly anything involving her and this guy she's getting married to. While we can understand that she's clearly with this guy just for convenience and not really any other reason, it does feel like it's a little too one note. I wanted to see a little bit more of diving into their relationship, and I think they could have done a bit more there. And also, I would have wanted to see more of Alyssa on her own, and we do get to see that, but I just wanted a little bit more overall, and I think that's something that was just a tad rushed overall. I think if we would just had like another, I think this season should have been 10 episodes. I really do. I think 8 episodes just was not enough for this season. I think they need at least 2 more to really delve into everything and really make this feel as satisfying as it possibly could. Because episode 2 is mainly catching up with Alyssa and James, in the past year. I actually feel like that should have been 2 episodes. Like, have one be all Alyssa, and then have one be all James. And I think it would have been that much more satisfying if they chose to go that way. And I get why they did what they did, but I would have wanted it to be a little bit more, just a little bit more fleshed out overall. But overall, the writing here is still really good. The show still does a lot of great stuff for sure, and I overall was very impressed with the way things were done here when it comes to the writing. In terms of cinematography, I actually think it's even better here. I mean, they really went all out in trying to up the stakes, and I think they did a really great job with that here. There's a lot of great just shots in this show, especially in the penultimate episode, which may just be, I think, the show's finest hour yet. Not hour, but finest half an hour yet. It really is down to the location. I mean, it's very minimal in the way that it's told. It's almost done like a stage play of sorts, and the cinematography is everything because of that. There's a lot of really well done shots here. There's a lot of great, like, they still do the dual perspectives that they did so well. All that stuff is great, and I really love cinematography. The score here also is so good as well. It has much more of like a darker sort of feel to it, and that really does fit in line with the tone of the rest of the season, and I was very impressed with the way that was done as well. And then, like I said, in terms of editing this season, I do think that the pacing is really good for the most part. It's definitely a bit slower pace than the first season, although it does zoom through some things pretty quickly. It does take a little more time in really getting into the central plot for this season, and that's something that I really did appreciate for sure. So again, there really is a lot to love about this season, and I already touched upon my one flaw, but my only other flaw with this season, I think, would be the final episode itself. And it's not what happens in the episode, it's that I felt that this episode, for me at least, was a little bit too rushed. And considering that it is the series finale, I think it needed to be a lot longer. I get that these episodes are mostly only like 22 minutes, but I actually would have been fine if this was a full 30-minute episode, because I just felt like there was a lot more they could have done. And don't get me wrong, there's some things that I absolutely adore here. The final scene in particular is absolutely perfect. I can't think of a better note to end the show on than the final scene, especially when you know, the parallels between that and season one. There's a lot of great stuff there. But there are things that happen in this episode that I just felt were a little too, it was just a little too rushed in that way, and it felt a little too much like an epilogue, and I think it should have been a full-on out. I think it should have been a full 30 minutes, and then overall, I think it could have been just a little bit more satisfying as a whole. But now I do want to get into some spoilers for this season, so if you have not seen the End of Fucking World Season 2, aside from the spoiler that I already said in the beginning of this video, I'm going to get into the really major stuff that I do think is best to go in, kept hidden, because you can go in knowing that James is alive, and I think you're fine. I don't really think it's that big of a spoiler, because obviously, yes, Season 1 left you on that note, but I mean, come on, the show's not going to be just Alyssa mourning James. Like, that just, it would not work in that way. So I think if you know that going in, you're fine. Anything else, I think, is best to just not know. So let's first talk about Bonnie's connection to James and Alyssa, because I really didn't know what they were going to do with this character, how they were going to drop her in, and they did it, I think, flawlessly. The whole setup with her, and, you know, basically her entire family is just not really taking her seriously. They don't really seem to have her best interests in mind, and they just don't treat her very well. Her mother constantly is belittling her and, like, blaming her for things, and, finally, she finds this, you know, unfortunately, the only person that she connects with is, of course, Professor Koch, who, as we know, is the man that tried to rape Alyssa in the beginning of Season 1. So we already know that this guy is obviously not a good person, but I think what the show did brilliantly is it showed that in Bonnie's perspective, even though, yes, she knows that she's in a very problematic relationship and that he is taking advantage of her, clearly, she doesn't care. This is the one guy that seems to show her any sort of affection, and the only person that seems to understand her. So you can understand, through Bonnie's perspective, why she doesn't view him as a bad guy. And it's also why they very much established that she's also crazy. But the show gets you to look into her worldview. And I've always said this before, the best villains are the ones that don't really feel like they are villains, and Bonnie's the perfect example of that, because even at the end of the season, when Alyssa is rationalizing, you know, why they killed him and what he was going to do, and Bonnie having the knowledge that he was sleeping with another student, she still sees the good in him. She still doesn't want to, she doesn't want to ruin his good name. She wants to hold on to the idea that what they had was real when it clearly wasn't. And the only reason that Bonnie feels the way is because, again, he's the only person that showed her any sense of kindness, even if clearly he was just doing this to take advantage of her. And you really do get to see that. So I thought they did a really good job with getting you to understand both perspectives in that way, and I really did appreciate that here for sure. And I think Bonnie is the kind of character that could have come off fairly one note. I was really worried when we were getting to the more, psychopathic Bonnie, that she was going to come across as someone who's very cartoony. But no, even in the end of the season, when you see her and she is about to pull that trigger, she doesn't go through with it because she knows that she can't do it. She knows what could end up happening to her. She finally starts to realize the dangerous implications of everything, and we finally see her break down and kind of realize what's happened to her and that she feels alone and that she's had no one. And you realize that while she's way more out of her mind and definitely not someone that is a sound individual, she's almost in the same boat that James and Alyssa were, where like they're just longing for connection. They're very lost in that way. And James was in a very similar position where he felt that he needed to kill someone. And Bonnie felt the same way. She felt like this was the only way to feel fulfilled, and I don't think there's a better way to have ended her character than the scene where she just like collapses on the floor and she's finally starting to break down, and you see that James and Alyssa, they don't want to have to kill her. They don't want to have to do anything to her, but we know that Bonnie does end up behind bars, and even at that, they still do feel for her, and I thought that was a really effective moment, and I really loved the way that was done for sure. But the other big tragedy that, of course, goes down this season is the very shocking death of James's dad. I was not expecting them to go in this direction because I love the idea that he is getting a lot closer with him, because we know his dad has always been on the right path. He's always tried to get close to his son. James has not really been willing to help him. But now that James is alone, and he now has this like new lease on life in a sense, and he has this new purpose, he is bonding way more with his dad. He's opening up to him, and of course the one person that he was starting to get close to, he ends up losing, and it's very devastating to watch. And again, I think that they did a really great job with catching us up on so much in such a small amount of time, and I don't think there's any scene that illustrates that better than when they're at that bowling alley and everything's going great, and then all of a sudden he just has that heart attack and he just dies, and instantly, and you're like, holy shit. And James is in, he's now living in like his car, and he carries on to his father's ashes, and he just can't let go of him because he's the person that he connected to besides Alyssa. And the idea that James is stalking her, while yes, it is creepy, there's something also kind of sweet about it. You realize that he really needs Alyssa in his life, and he is kind of like watching out for her. He knows a lot of what's happening to her. He knows about the threats. He knows about the fact that she's with a guy that she clearly doesn't want to be married to. No one, I think, understands Alyssa better than James. And same when it comes to Alyssa. I don't think anyone understands James better than her. And I think that's something that they were really played into here. So, like, yeah, obviously, him stalking Alyssa is really weird. You can understand why he's doing that. This is his only way of being able to still have her in his life, because everyone thinks he's dead. Pretty much everyone thinks that he's gone. They don't realize that she doesn't realize that he may still be alive, and she thinks that he just cut him off. And I love the moment where we find out that Alyssa's mother basically told James to fuck off. Like she did not want him in her daughter's life. And you realize that the root of Alyssa's misery is really her father. It's not not her father, but her mother. It's not her fault at all. Both of her parents just are not good people, and we really do see that through Gwen this season. I liked that they gave her a lot more to do because you understood her a lot more as a character, and I thought they did a really good job with that. it's really just Todd, who, look, I really like Todd as a character. You can see someone who he really loved Alyssa. There's that really heartbreaking scene where you know she's about to break up with him, but he's talking about, like, where he wants, you know, their dream house to be and where he wants everything to go. It's a really good scene. But there's always that sense that Alyssa does not care about him as much. And again, while you can understand that, I wish the show had spent just a little bit more time on that relationship. See, just seeing Alyssa trying to make things work. Trying to see if she can maybe fix something there. Because while obviously she is not into this at all, I would have liked to see them at least try. I would have liked to see them in the early stages, you know, not montage through all that stuff. James's stuff, I get why they montage through, because there was a lot to unpack there. Alyssa's, I feel like, would have actually worked more if they didn't just, like, montage through it. And I think it would have actually made for an even more effective arc, especially when it comes to the finale, when she goes to Koch's, what used to be Koch's house, and, you know, she's living there. You think, oh my god, is she going to end up killing herself or something like that? It's a really effective moment. But I feel like it could have been even more effective if we would have spent a little bit more time there. If we would have gotten the sense that, like, Alyssa's out of options pretty much, and she doesn't really know how to feel about James coming back. Because, you know, James is telling her that he loves her and he's opening himself up, and you can tell that she's still closing herself off. She isn't willing to really admit her feelings. That is until she realizes just how much James cares and just how the lengths that he's going to go to help her. When he realizes that she may be gone, he takes it as a suicide note. She didn't mean it as a suicide note, but he very much took it as one. And when he ends up essentially saving her, because you kind of get the sense that she was, in a sense, kind of at the end of her rope. Like, she didn't know where to go and things like that. And while you could say, okay, yes, they're just settling for each other, I think what the point of this ending is and why it works so well for me is because now it feels genuine. When Alyssa tells James that she loves him, she generally does mean it. When she, you know, she's willing to take his burnt hand now and not his regular hand, because she's used to him now. She's not afraid of him anymore. She can open herself up, and she's willing to finally let James be someone that she can rely on, be someone that's there for emotional stability. And I think these two are now in a place where they are much better individuals. They are much more rational. They are much calmer in that sense. And even though, yes, it's hard for James to, you know, scatter his father's ashes and say goodbye to him in that way, he still does have Alyssa. And in a sense, it's now them getting to go off on their own and find their own path and not have to do anything, you know, a certain way. You know, they've gotten out of this scot-free. They're not criminals anymore. It's a really good, I think, realistic interpretation of what would happen in this scenario. You know, these two thought that they could be like Bonnie and Clyde or something like that, but they were anything but that. They weren't bad people. They just were in really tough situations that made them kind of apathetic, you know, just like Alyssa was with Todd this season. But I don't think Alyssa comes across as unlikable, because you can understand why she feels this way. You could just understand that, like, Todd was her only option at the moment and that she couldn't be with James. And then when she's finally opening up to him, it just feels so satisfying in that way. These two are finally going to be able to have a real relationship. Nothing's getting in the way now. There is no Bonnie. You know, Alyssa has divorced Todd. She pretty much just, you know, left the house and things like that. Both of James's parents are gone. They now have each other. They now can work on their relationship and not have to worry about anything else getting in the way of it. And I think it's a really just beautiful way to end this show, because it's not just about them being in a relationship. It really stems back to the idea that these two changed each other. They really changed each other, brought out the best in themselves. And especially when it comes to James, I mean, just the amount of care and the amount of emotion he had this season, he would have never had in season 1. He would have been very closed off. And Alyssa was still closed off. That's until she finally got to James. And yes, it was obviously in her own way, because even when she says she loves him, she says not to make a big deal out of it. You know, that stuff was great. It was just the perfect way to wrap it up. And I think that they did a really satisfying job. I didn't really know how I felt coming into this, that this was going to be the final season of the show, but I honestly couldn't have thought of a better way to end things on than what we did get here. Overall, though, when it comes down to it, is this season necessary? Yes, I definitely do think that we needed this season. I think there was definitely more story to be told for sure. It dives a lot deeper into who Alyssa and James are as people, not just how they are together, but how they are as people individually, and then get into if they are actually compatible or not, but also starts to dive into the others that they have affected and the impact that that really does have on them. And yes, there are some aspects that are definitely a little bit rushed, but it's still just as funny. It's still just as insightful. It's still just as fun. And it still has, but it also still has that great, genuine heart that the first season has. And it's a show that I definitely had an amazing time with, that I am very happy that had to have at least one last go around. And so because of that, I'm actually going to give this season the same grade that I gave the first, which is an A-. But overall, guys, in my review this season, The End of the Fucking World, I know this review is a little bit delayed since this came out in November and things like that, but let me know what you guys saw this season overall, if your thoughts, and I do still have 3 more reviews coming, and then I will get to my best shows of 2019 list. I do plan on reviewing some shows in 2020 in the meantime, actually, so look forward to that. But that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.